While instability has been a recurring theme in North and West Africa, violent events have become more frequent and deadly in recent years. Furthermore, their underlying dynamics have grown increasingly complex. Independent self-defense militias, rebel groups and transnational organizations affiliated with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State are putting greater pressure on the stability of states in the region than ever before. SWAC's latest research on security therefore set out to identify where politically motivated violence is occurring, how and why the nature and intensity of conflicts is changing, and what interventions can reduce the risk of conflicts and lessen their impact. Three key findings of the report are: politically motivated violence has increased nearly 500% across the region since 2010. However, political violence has occurred with more regularity and force in some geographies and years than others. Border regions are disproportionately central to the geography of political violence, both in the number of events and the number of fatalities that occur there. 40% of violent events and fatalities were recorded within 100 kilometers of land borders. Violence targeting civilians has also soared, especially in West Africa. Here, attacks against civilians now exceed clashes between the respective governments and armed groups. The report looks at instances of political violence from 1997 to 2019 recorded in the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. It looks both at the macro, covering 23 years and nearly 13 million square kilometers, and the micro, paying particular focus to three military interventions: the 2011 NATO intervention in Libya, the French-led intervention in Mali in 2013, and the regional effort against Boko Haram around Lake Chad since 2015. We consider North Africa and West Africa separately and differentiate between types of political violence to more accurately identify the geography of conflict. Concerning the different types of political violence, we first track battles between opposing armed groups, including state forces. Here, West Africa represents 2/3 of the overall total. Secondly, we looked at remote violence, an attack carried out by some means that doesn't require the physical presence of the attacker. For example, remotely detonated explosives or attacks from remotely piloted weapon systems. Remote violence, shown in green, has been a more central tactic to the conflicts in North Africa and tracks rather closely to the number of battles. However, it has also been increasingly used in West Africa, particularly since 2010. Thirdly, attacks on unarmed civilian groups, the tan-coloured line. These attacks have occurred in North Africa, but were nearly 5 times more likely in West Africa. Indeed, their use has surged in West Africa since 2016, and last year alone, there were more than 2,000 such attacks, the highest figure recorded. Overall, 32,000 violent political events were observed, leading directly to the death of nearly 144,000 people. These shocking numbers illustrate a troubling trend. These fatalities are illustrated on this map. The larger the circle, the more people have been killed in that location. We can see that violence was mostly concentrated in a few West African states, including Nigeria and in Algeria, but expanded and emerged in some areas, whilst receding in others, demonstrating the complex and ever-changing geography of conflict. The most dramatic shift occurred after 2009 with the rise of Boko Haram. The last 4 years have represented nearly half of all violent events and more than 40% of all fatalities. The map also indicates the disproportionate number of events and fatalities that occur near international borders. For example, those between Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. Border regions are thus instrumental in considering how the geography of violence is changing and where policy efforts could have a significant impact. The complexities of violence highlighted in these maps led us to develop an indicator that tracks the geographic characteristics of conflicts over time. The Spatial Conflict Dynamics Indicator, or SCDI, is built on 2 properties that are measurable, quantifiable, and mappable. Conflict intensity, the amount of violence in a defined area over a period of time, and conflict concentration, the geographical distribution of violent events. Combining these 2 measures gives 4 typologies that can track not only how conflicts are evolving, but also considers the process of how violence begins and could end. We will take Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State in Nigeria, as an example to show how the indicator works. Borno State was heavily impacted by Boko Haram, particularly at the height of the conflict in 2015. What you see here is an alluvial chart. This visualizes the change in SCDI category every month during 2015 in Maiduguri. we can see that the city did have short periods of relative calm during the year, but clustered, high-intensity violence nearly always returned. This indicator can be used to understand how conflict ebbs and flows over short or long time intervals and within single locations or across vast regions. These characteristics thus enable us to make comparative analyses between different regions to identify why violence started or subsided, how long it occurred for, and what interventions were most successful. As previously alluded to, the report also assesses how conflicts evolved in response to military interventions. Looking at the number of events and fatalities before, during, and after different interventions, it is possible to identify a relatively consistent pattern in each case. A surge in violence as a result of the intervention itself, followed by a rapid decrease in violence, and then a general escalation and return to pre-intervention conflict levels. We saw this pattern in Libya and Mali, and are beginning to see hints of this being repeated in northeast Nigeria now too. This highlights how military strategies alone are unlikely to produce a durable peace. This report highlights just how complex the evolving geographies of violence can be. However, with this new indicator, there is a means to address that complexity in an adaptable, repeatable, and scalable way. There are no or very few indicators of political violence or otherwise that have such inherent geographic or temporal flexibility. It is clear that violence is getting worse and that civilians are bearing the brunt, most notably in West Africa and in border areas. Responses must remain regional even if tensions can appear quite localized over time. Specific efforts need to be pursued in peripheral areas, in particular to relieve some of the human impacts of the violence. We can also see that military solutions alone are not enough. What's needed are political solutions, and this means that protecting civilian populations from violence is key. Failing to do that would weaken the social contract between people and the state, leaving the door open for those who have alternative and competing political agendas.